You are not the first kind of human to walk this earth. That might sound strange. You think of humanity as one thing, one species, one story. But for most of the last 500,000 years, there were others. Other humans. Walking, hunting, grieving, surviving. On the same planet, sometimes in the same valleys, breathing the same air as your ancestors. And then they were gone. Every single one of them. Extinct. Vanished so completely that for centuries we didn't even know they had existed. So what happened? Were they wiped out? Absorbed? Outcompete so slowly they barely noticed? And what does it say about you, the only human species left, that you are the one still here? To answer that, you have to go back. Not just a few centuries. Not even a few thousand years. You have to go back to a world where being human meant something far stranger and more crowded than it does today. At least 6 distinct human species are known to have existed within the last 300,000 years. 6. Homo neanderthalensis in Europe and Western Asia. The Denisovans, known from a single finger bone and a handful of teeth found in a Siberian cave. Homo floresiensis on the Indonesian island of Flores. A species so small, standing barely a meter tall with a brain roughly the size of a grapefruit, that researchers initially refused to believe it was real. Homo erectus, one of the longest surviving human species, persisting for nearly 2 million years. Homo luzonensis in the Philippines. And your own species, Homo sapiens, emerging in Africa and beginning to spread outward roughly 70,000 years ago. For a time, these species coexisted. That is the part that tends to stop people cold. In 2014, a team led by Oxford archaeologist Tom Hyam used improved radiocarbon dating to narrow the disappearance of Neanderthals to approximately 40,000 years ago. That date matters, because it lines up almost exactly with when Homo sapiens arrived in Europe in significant numbers. Not a coincidence recorded in stone tools. A coincidence recorded in bones. But before you picture your ancestors as conquerors, before you imagine spears and battles and deliberate extermination, the real story is considerably more complicated and more unsettling. In 2010, geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute published something that rewrote the story entirely. They sequenced the Neanderthal genome, and buried inside it was a fact that no one had fully expected. If you are of non-African descent, between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Your ancestors did not only compete with Neanderthals, they had children with them. That same year, David Reich and colleagues identified an entirely new hominin lineage, the Denisovans, from a single finger bone found in Denisova cave in Siberia. No skull, no skeleton, just a fragment of a child's finger, preserved by the cold. And yet the DNA inside that fragment told a complete story. The Denisovans were a distinct human species, and they too interbred with Homo sapiens ancestors moving through Asia. If you carry indigenous Australian, Melanesian, or South Asian ancestry, roughly 4 to 6% of your genome traces back to them. So the other humans did not simply vanish into nothing. Parts of them survived, inside you, but most of them did not survive. And the question of why is still one of the most debated problems in all of paleoanthropology, the study of ancient human origins. For a long time, the dominant theory was simple. Homo sapiens were smarter, superior. The Neanderthals were brutish, limited, incapable of real language or symbolic thought, and your ancestors simply replaced them the way a more advanced technology replaces an older one. It was a comfortable story. It positioned your species as the inevitable winner. Researchers Paula Villa and Will Robrooks challenged that story directly in a 2012 paper published in PLOS One. When they systematically reviewed the archaeological evidence, they found that Neanderthals were not primitive in the ways the old story required. Neanderthals used pigments, ochre and manganese dioxide, possibly for body decoration. They made jewelry from eagle talons and shells. They buried their dead. Their tools were sophisticated. The gap between Neanderthal cognition and sapiens cognition, Villa and Robrooks argued, was nowhere near large enough to explain a sudden, total extinction. So if it was not a matter of intelligence, what was it? Let's reconstruct the situation as clearly as the evidence allows. Picture a Neanderthal group somewhere in what is now southern France, roughly 42,000 years ago. A small band, maybe 20, maybe 30 individuals. They know this landscape intimately. They have hunted its reindeer and horses for generations. They know which valleys shelter from the winter wind, which rivers run clear in summer, which caves are dry. This is not ignorance. This is accumulated knowledge, passed down across hundreds of thousands of years of survival. Now picture a group of Homo sapiens moving into the same region. They are carrying something the Neanderthals are not. Not better spears, though their tools may be slightly more refined. Not bigger brains. The size difference is marginal and does not automatically confer advantage. What they are carrying is a social network. Wider, more flexible, more connected than anything Neanderthals appear to have maintained. Evidence from Blombos Cave in South Africa, where Francesco D'Erico and Christopher Henshelwood's excavations uncovered engraved ochre and shell beads dated to between 75,000 and 100,000 years ago, suggests that Homo sapiens had been practicing symbolic communication, the kind that binds strangers into allies, for a very long time before they ever met a Neanderthal. That capacity to connect with strangers, to trade, to share information across distance, to form alliances beyond your immediate family, may have been the decisive advantage. Not a weapon, a social technology. Paleoanthropologist Ian Tattersall has argued that the emergence of symbolic language gave Homo sapiens an ability to reorganize their behavior rapidly in response to new conditions. Neanderthals, by contrast, appear to have been highly localized. Their tool traditions changed very slowly over enormous stretches of time. Their range movements were limited. When conditions shifted, adaptation came slowly. And then there was the matter of numbers. Jean-Pierre Bacquet-Appel and Anna DiGiovanni modeled Neanderthal population size in a 2013 paper published in Current Anthropology. Their estimates place the total Neanderthal population at somewhere between 10,000 and 70,000 individuals at their peak, spread across a vast geographic range from Western Europe to Central Asia. That is a dangerously thin margin. A population that's small, that spread out, with low genetic diversity, confirmed by later genome work from Johannes Kraus and Svante Pääbo's team in 2018, which found that Neanderthals had striking genetic uniformity consistent with small, isolated groups. Does not need to be wiped out to go extinct. It needs only to be slightly outcompete, slightly outreproduced, slightly less able to recover from disease, from a bad winter, from a string of failed hunts. You do not need a massacre to erase a species. You need only a small, persistent disadvantage compounding across thousands of years. And Homo floresiensis? The tiny humans of Flores Island, whose remains were first described by Mike Morwood and Peter Brown and their teams in two landmark 2004 papers in Nature. They appear to have survived until roughly 50,000 years ago, possibly coexisting with modern humans for a time, before disappearing, likely a combination of volcanic activity and the arrival of Homo sapiens disrupting the ecosystem they had inhabited for hundreds of thousands of years. The Denisovans left almost no trace beyond their DNA. We do not know what they looked like. We do not know how they lived. We know they existed because of the cold of one Siberian cave and the chance preservation of one small bone. They are a ghost species, known only through the fragments they left inside you. So here is what the evidence, assembled across decades of excavation and genomics, actually shows. The other humans did not vanish because they were failures. They were not evolutionary dead ends stumbling toward inevitable extinction. Neanderthals survived for roughly 400,000 years, far longer than Homo sapiens has existed yet. Homo erectus persisted for nearly 2 million. These were not failed experiments. They were successful species that met a specific set of pressures they were not equipped to survive. Small populations, limited social range, a competitor that happened to carry wider networks, faster cultural adaptation, and the demographic momentum of a species expanding out of a continent. The extinction of the other humans was not a triumph. It was a narrowing, a loss of variation. A world that had been, for hundreds of thousands of years, genuinely plural, genuinely multiple kinds of human, collapsed into one. And that one is you, which raises a question worth sitting with. You live in a world where being human means exactly one thing. One genome, one species. You have never known anything else. But for the vast majority of the time that anything called a human has existed on this earth, that was not true. There were others, thinking, grieving, surviving others. And the silence they left behind is not empty. It is inside you, in the 1 to 4% of your genome that came from a species that no longer exists, in the trace signals of Denisovan ancestry carried in the DNA of people across Asia and the Pacific today. You are not the survivor of a simple story. You are the product of a crowded, complicated, irreversibly lost world. You are not the first kind of human to walk this earth. You are just the only kind left,